Welcome back to another Share Your Light episode. And these are our chance to showcase people in our listening audience who are stepping more fully into their power, their light, their purpose. They're finding what's really calling their heart and seeing how they can make a difference. And today we're welcoming Jennifer Sanders. Jennifer is a trauma-informed coach who specializes in how past trauma impacts a person's physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Jennifer has extensive grief training and is a certified grief support specialist. She's also an accredited death doula. While working in an administrative capacity at an assisted living facility during the COVID pandemic, Jennifer became acutely aware of the lack of support services and grief training for our healthcare workers. The level of grief and trauma they face every day is often seen as just part of the job. Jennifer is passionate about instituting grief training for healthcare professionals. Her goal is to help challenge and shift the societal expectations of how to deal with bereavement and loss. Jennifer utilizes a beautiful blend of compassion, insight, and humor to help her clients navigate death, grief, loss, and bereavement. Her natural abilities as an intuitive medium gives Jennifer a deeper level of understanding and clarity. She helps identify how trauma can shape a person's life and emotions while providing a foundation to foster deep healing through developing strategies and exercises that empower people on their healing journey. So welcome, Jennifer.
Hey, Denise, how are you today?
I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you for doing this with me because I think right now, so many people are at a loss of how to process through grief, through trauma, and they're ready for some changes to take place in their life. So not only on a personal level, but also globally, we're being so impacted with so much turmoil and unrest.
I can definitely agree. And grief is not only about death. Maybe I should just start by saying that there's so much trauma in the world that sometimes it just looks like it's normal for people. One of my favorite sayings that my daughter shares is for my dad, it was a Tuesday afternoon, but for me, it was a traumatic experience. It's really weird how society looks at it.
It is. And it's also, you're right, it's an individual process. You know, when you were speaking, what popped into my head is dysfunction. Like my level of dysfunction, someone might see as really, oh my gosh, how did you get through that? Whereas I'm saying, you buck up and you deal with it. So I think that grief is the same way. It's very insidious that it can become normalized in our lives. And all of a sudden we don't realize the physical, emotional, and spiritual impact it's actually having on us. So what led you into this work with specializing in grief?
Well, first of all, nobody wants to talk about it. And I think I told you before, there is 100% chance of mortality. Everybody faces it, but nobody, and I'm not going to say nobody, but you don't want to be the one in the room talking about death because you're just going to be like, they're going to look the other way. They're not going to want to hold a conversation with you. I want to bring some normalcy to grief, but I think what started all of it was after I lost my mother, because it was the hardest thing that I had to go through because I wasn't fully expecting it. And I did lose her to COVID, along with a lot of other people. So I know that I'm not alone. But with losing her to COVID and then the isolation on top of everything, it was a dark, dark place to be. I started just trying to figure out what was going to make sense, what was going to make me feel better. And I know that I'm a healer. Not that I can heal someone's grief, but I think that I could walk with them through it. Maybe shed a little bit of light and let them know that, hey, it's going to be okay for you to laugh again. And it's going to be okay for you to smile again.
I think that that's really, really so vital. And the way you described it was perfect. How do we deal with this? How do we see death as a transition and just part of life and not something to be feared or something to avoid? And I know that that's a big premise in your work as well, is how to help people face loss and grief with as much dignity and grace as possible.
Exactly. And especially with the societal norms. I believe I heard on a previous podcast that I think Samantha said she couldn't believe they gave you, what, 3 to 5 days of bereavement pay? Yeah, because in 3 to 5 days, you're expected to go back to work and be completely normal. And there is nothing in your life that is normal after 3 to 5 days. My wonderful husband even made the comment, whenever you give birth, you get at least 6 weeks pay for a baby. Why can't they give you 6 weeks pay for a death?
So even though some workplaces do offer programs, you've done some research around that as well?
Yes. So I found a study, and I want to say it was from AARP. I can't remember right off. Only about 5% of employed people that have the EAP programs, you actually utilize those services. And they don't want to use those services. Not the 95% that don't utilize those services don't use those services because they don't want to talk to a stranger. So that's really that's where the grief support and peer support comes into play.
But they're covering themselves by offering the programs that people may not utilize because of a lack of comfort or because of the vulnerability. Grief brings out vulnerability, and you need to have people that you feel safe with in order to be able to express what you're going through.
Absolutely. And that's the thing, they don't feel safe talking to a stranger.
No.
So that's why these programs, they are huge. I mean, they are of a great value, but they're very much underused.
Mm-hmm. So what does EAP stand for?
That's the employee assistance programs.
Okay.
And a lot of your big corporations have some type of employee assistance programs. Now, I don't know with healthcare specifically. Like I said, I know I had to really do some homework just to find those programs for my employees at the time. But yeah, definitely that is a resource that people could use if they are experiencing grief and want to reach out. Definitely reach out to human resources or reach out to me as well.
Right. Yes. And when I was working in a school district, there were a rash of students who they chose to leave by suicide. And it was very traumatic for the community and for the staff and for the students. And they said, anyone that needs support, this is in place. And they brought in counselors, but it was fast. It wasn't ongoing. It was the immediate response. They checked a box, and I'm not being disrespectful because I know that they helped some people, but that level of trauma, of loss, of overwhelm, especially if you're dealing with children or in any type of a big institutionalized setting, it doesn't just go away. And knowing that you have people you feel safe talking to is incredibly important.
Yes. And I want to make sure that people know that I want to be a safe person. I want to feel like a safe person for people to talk to as well, because that really is important to people, that they feel safe, that they feel heard and acknowledged and validated. That is one of the most important things that anyone experiencing a loss can do, is just feel validated and heard. Even if they have to tell that story 20 times about how they lost their father.
But there's also the aspect of confidentiality, because sometimes things will come out that people may not see as a traditional or expected symptom of grief. So could you touch on that a little bit about what are some ways that grief may manifest?
So it can definitely manifest like insomnia, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, time loss, headaches, just feeling like a fog.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, anger, being extremely irritable, sensory overload. There's a lot of ways that it can manifest. One of the things that anyone needs to do if they are experiencing any kind of suicidal thoughts, please, please, please reach out for help.
Yes. So important.
Absolutely. Because that is not a normal response to grief.
What about impulsivity? I know that a lot of people will suddenly go, they'll spend extravagantly, or they'll make some very abrupt changes in their life. And I've always heard the benchmark is to give it a year before you make any major life changes after a major loss or transition in your life, or bereavement or life change. So I'm not using that if you need to relocate from a bad divorce or something, but more not to make extreme decisions.
Yes. Impulsiveness definitely is. It's a normal reaction. If you want to know some abnormal reactions, I can give you that as well. If you're extremely antisocial, isolated, self-harm, self-medication, violence against other people, personal hygiene, make sure you're taking care of yourself in that way.
That's wonderful, because as you were speaking, I was thinking of someone who that's how they expressed their grief, was with anger, with violence, and I know that they were in pain at the time, but it caused a lot of problems for that person and also their immediate family. So I think that that's another aspect of this. If you know someone who's going through a deep grief of any kind and you feel like they need some support or help, find a way to reach out to them or offer some resources, or be kind. That goes back to what you said before. Be kind and compassionate, and realize that we really need to look out for each other.
We really do. And that's another thing, is when people are in those deep dark days of grief, you can't really reason with people. You can't tell them they're wrong. You can't tell them how to grieve, because there's no correct way to grieve. And especially if you're following the stages, you can't follow those either, because they're not meant to be linear as well. And they, like we had talked about, they're not meant to follow the normal grief.
So what about people that are trapped in grief and so it's been 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, and they just keep reliving that same pattern, or they're as you said, they're isolating, or they're angry, or those other behaviors are being exhibited. Is there something that we can do because it's frustrating when we want people to not, God, this sounds so cold, not say, oh, snap out of it, but how do we throw that lifeline to someone who is so mired in that repetitive mindset of what they've lost?
So one of the things that I've learned is that if someone keeps doing the loop tape and just keeps staying stuck where they're at, it means they're not fully being heard and validated. There's some kind of a disconnect that's going on. I don't know what to tell you to do to get them out of that, but they're going to stay stuck in that until the right person actually hears them and validates their feelings. And it can take a long time. That same story, once you start diving in deep with a person and asking questions like, how did that make you feel? Why did you feel that way? What do you want your life to look like? It can get them, maybe move them from a place of like, okay, this happened and I have to accept it. Because really that's what you want them to do. You don't want them to get over it. You just want them to accept it and be able to live a happy, functional life. But you can't make those decisions for a person either.
Really vital point in everything that you're saying is, again, we've said this repeatedly, it's an individual journey through grief and how we process that. And we can hold space for people, and we can offer, and we can listen, and we can do all the things from a place of kindness. Personal opinion, sometimes it can become a fine line between, it almost mirrors a codependent relationship versus an empowering situation where we're trying to help someone. Even with the kindest intentions, sometimes we may be encouraging people to stay in that place. Maybe encouraging isn't the right word.
That's one thing you have to do. You do have to realize when you're helping that person and when they become dependent, because you do not want to create a dependent relationship. You know, if you're offering to walk the dog, make sure you know, hey, I'm going to be here to walk the dog, and set that time limit for yourself, so that if you are the person that's assisting someone in grief, say, hey, I can come over and walk the dog for 2 weeks. That way, and even if you have to give them a little direction, like, hey, you need to set your timer and walk the dog at 2 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
You're still helping them, but you're also giving them the power back to get that sense of normalcy back.
So it's a progressive transitionary process from its baby steps.
Correct.
Okay.
Because if and I'll just use this, if your husband dies and he was the one that always walked the dog, you might not ever want to walk the dog again. Someone needs to be there to empower you, not be mean, but just say, hey, I can walk the dog at 9, you walk them at 2. Until, depending on the friend, they may not want to stay that friend forever, but if someone's there with you for the long haul, they will see you through it.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. If you go trying to squash down your grief, it's going to keep coming back in different ways. That's where the trauma-informed coaching kind of comes into play, because you start noticing, okay, you're feeling the effects of grief in your stomach because you're all the time maybe having to go to the bathroom.
That's true. For a lot of people, digestive tract issues become really pronounced when they're dealing with grief, and they don't make the correlation between the two.
Right. And it just manifests in other ways when you don't deal with it. So, and that's on a whole nother level that I don't provide, but I do understand how it works.
What I love is that you come at all of your work with such a level of compassion. And I was on your website, inappropriategriefcoach.com, and I noticed that you offer other services, but all of it has that thread of compassion through it. So you lost your mom to COVID, and at that same time, you were working in an assisted living facility and as an administrator. So you were not only helping oversee the facility, but also the people who were on the wards taking care of people, or in the rooms taking care of people. So how did that lead to wanting to support our healthcare workers in grief and loss?
When my building went through our own outbreak, there were several people that I loved, and I still love dearly, my own son included. They were the actual staff that were tending to all the residents. And I watched their mental health deteriorate, and I couldn't do anything about it because there was nothing in place from our employer at that time to give them any support as far as for their mental health. And I think what support was in place was buried under a lot of human resources stuff that you would have really had to dig through to find. So it wasn't readily available. And then when I did find the adequate resources, I was told when any of the employees called that they were asked to pay for services as well. That just really left me with a bad taste in my mouth, first and foremost.
Well, and I remember you sharing with me that you started to do more research and dig around, and seeing that most companies, most corporations, businesses have no training in place to help. And I shared with you before that I've worked in a lot of hospitals, group homes, state institutions, care facilities, and there was minimal to no training, and you do get attached to the people that are there, and you do have compassion, and you get to know them, you get to hear their stories, you get to, or even if they're non-communicative, they're another human being that you build an energetic feeling and bond with. When they transition or pass, all the focus goes to supporting the family, but the people who were on the front lines and caring, it's just like, okay, we're going to move someone else in, quick, next person. And I think that is so important to look at, because we're asking these kind, sensitive, intuitive people who are in the healthcare profession to turn it on and off, and to not have that time to process, or to have the training to understand how it may manifest in their body and in their life.
You're exactly right. And one of the things that I would have to do is I would have to onboard all of the people. So I would have to bring them in, do their hiring paperwork, and set them down for all their trainings. And when they were going through those trainings, it never occurred to me until after I actually left that facility that I never once saw any training about death or grief or what you might experience. Now, what I did see was a lot of how you can the infection control. So, you know how to wash your hands, and you've known how to do that since at least age 5 when you went to school. But nobody ever tells these young kids that's like, I want to be a nurse. And so they start in at the assisted living facilities or the long-term care facilities on the ground floor. And they just want to love these little old grandmas and grandpas. But nobody says, hey, just be careful. You're going to experience loss during this. They don't even think about it. It's not even mentioned anywhere. And I will tell you this, something that I found out in my trainings, that there's only about 90 minutes worth of training in grad school. And they combine death, dying, and grieving all into that 90-minute segment.
Is that a specific modality, or so you said in graduate school? Is that
Grad
for
school, like an LPC?
Okay.
So
Okay.
specifically, I do know that there was only a 90-minute training for an LPC.
So it was the professional people are not getting the training that they need to be able to process this, but also to support their staff or their people that are helping them care for all these folks.
Correct. When I've been doing the research on some, the only thing that's I think some people have said is that they may have overheard hospice saying, hey, you can reach out to us. But it was never like a formal invitation to, hey, we will provide you grief support because you were part of the community and part of this person's life. It was just a comment in passing. So
I worked night shift in a nursing home when I was in college. I went home for one summer and I worked night shift. And this was before deinstitutionalization and all the other supports that have been put into place. And it was by far the hardest job I've ever had in my life. And I've worked a long time in a lot of different capacities. But the throwaway mentality that let's put people in a facility and then they don't exist anymore. But the people that I worked with on that shift and in that building were incredibly kind. They were thoughtful. They loved those people dearly. And even to this day, decades later, I can remember the people I worked with. I can remember the clients. I can remember when they'd pass, that sense of loss, that sense of, my default was I would go, and I lived by the ocean then, I would go walk the beach. I would, pray for them. I would, hope that they had a gentle transition. But there was nothing in place. And to hear that that's still the case all this time late, all these years later, is really concerning, because we have to take care of each other. We have to take care of our people. And yes, hospice has beautiful supports in place to help, but my gut feeling is you would need someone who is in the industry and understands what it's really like to be that caretaker in that modality, not as a hospice person. Does that make any sense at all?
Absolutely, because like you said, hospice, they do wonderful, wonderful programs toward end of life, but they're not educating people on the experiences that they might face. And maybe they are at the hospice organizations. I've not ever worked in hospice directly. But they do have beautiful programs and they are well informed. But even the hospice coordinators that I've talked with, they say that it is so needed out in the community instead of just in the hospice facilities as far as grief support.
A couple of dear friends that worked in hospice for years, and they're both very kind, loving people. And I can see where they would give such comfort, not only to the person who was transitioning, but also to the family and loved ones around. But we're focusing a lot on death, on bereavement, on that aspect, but trauma and grief and loss can also show up in a lot of different ways in people's lives, maybe through divorce or job loss. Or could you talk on that for a minute, of different ways that this type of grief can show up in our lives?
Well, since my cat interrupted us, a pet loss. That is one of the hardest things. And I know that's still death, but to me, that would be one of the hardest things that I would have to go through as well, because I am so in tune with my cats.
Mm-hmm.
And I love animals. So if you would lose your pet, if you've lost your spouse, even if you've had the nastiest divorce that there is, there's still reasons to grieve over that, because surely your entire marriage wasn't all nasty and bad. And there's even things that we don't want to talk about. It may look inappropriate to society.
That use of the word inappropriate really exemplifies that grief is an individual journey, and we can't compare, and there is no benchmark of check. I mean, there are the 5 stages of grief. There's the 6th stage of acceptance. That's documented. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful resource. But you're right. One person's divorce versus another's, or choices that you've made, and what popped into my head is, transitions in your own life, or maybe the grief of being alienated from your family of origin, or having a no contact order with a child, or there's no limit to how this can manifest and show up in your life. But it doesn't mean it's more or less just because of what the circumstances are.
Absolutely. And I think even like pregnancy, miscarriages, some people think you're just supposed to get over everything. And let me just say something. I don't like the term get over grief, because if you love somebody, I don't think you can ever just get over it. One of my instructors used a beautiful, well, it's not a beautiful illustration. It's kind of a morbid one, but I'm just going to go ahead and share it because she said I could. She said, let's just imagine that you're in a horrible car crash and you lose your arm. At the time you lose your arm, you're not thinking about, I still have my other arm. You are going to grieve the loss of that arm, regardless. You're not thinking about, so I'm just putting this back to the baby. You're not thinking about, oh, well, you can have another baby. That's hurtful and unhelpful. So, you have to understand that, yes, you're going to have to grieve that situation. And it's not helpful to say, well, at least they didn't suffer. I could go on and on about things that are unhelpful to say to people.
And I think that that's a really, really important part of all that you're doing.
So one of the best things that you can do for a person, especially when they've lost someone, it's almost just like you're in a fog, because you're not making sense of time. You're not making sense of anything. And if you are that person that is there to support the person in grief, the best thing you can do is just not make them make a lot of decisions. Does the dog need to be walked? Just offer practical things to help people. If you're going to ask questions, make it like, how are you eating? How are you sleeping? That way it shows that you're concerned about their well-being. Things like that are really helpful.
We want to help, we want to support, but people don't know how. They just don't know how to. You can express condolences, you can bring by a casserole, you can do those things that are socially seen as the right thing to do. But that ends, and that's always my concern is, for any deep loss or transition, people are right on the forefront for that first month or those first several weeks. But the real pain seems to kick in when everybody goes back to their own lives and you're left, whether it's, the breakup of a relationship, or the loss of someone that you love, or a pet that you've had as a family member, or even, and I wonder about this. I think that there is some grief in stepping out of who people may have perceived you to be as you accept who you really are.
Yes, it's funny that you said that. That's actually a topic that I wrote down, loss of self. Because and something else that I was considering just the other day is everything you lose when you get married. Isn't that a crazy thing to think about? But you lose a lot of yourself when you get married because you have to kind of blend with someone else to make it normal for both of you, not just you or not just them. But there is a whole world of loss, and if people haven't experienced it, I have yet to find one.
This is what I love about your work, is that you find humor. You find humor and levity, and you raise the vibration with a really heavy topic. I mean, this isn't easy. Grief, loss, bereavement, death. I mean, holy shit, that's not easy stuff to work through for any of us, but it is part of our experience being here on the planet. And I do giggle every time that you say, there's 100% mortality rate. It's waiting for all of us. I was listening to this woman speak, and she was about my age, and she was talking about pro-aging versus anti-aging. And she said, are you having adventures? Are you growing and evolving? Are you living your life full? Or are you still stuck in what? And she brought up exactly what you said. She said, we're all going out. It's waiting for us. It's just a matter of time. And the person who was interviewing her made kind of an uncomfortable state, like, oh, where am I supposed to go with that? And I thought about how we have to realize that this is about being alive. This is about healing ourselves so that we can make the most of being here and help other people.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that I want to do during my time here on earth is to just leave it kinder than I found it. Maybe nobody will care how kind I left it, or even if I left it that kind. But if you've been in my presence, you might laugh. I don't know. I make really stupid, inappropriate jokes sometimes, and that's okay. If you're that person that's okay with that, I want you to laugh. And I'm not going to say you're going to laugh immediately at the dumbest joke that I can tell, but I want you to realize it is going to be okay to smile and laugh through that pain. And sometimes that's all you can do is just start laughing as you're crying just to get through it.
Because that is key, and laughter is healing, and joy. And that's, as mediums, we both know this. Our people want us to be happy. They want us to find joy again. They want us to find love again. I have never, in all the decades I've been a medium, had anyone come through and say, I want them to be miserable and sad. Never.
What about when they were here on earth? There are some people that want people to be miserable.
Oh, that's very true. 100% true.
But even what you said, I know that even years before my mother died, she said, if you're ever on vacation and you get the phone call that I've died, just finish your vacation. And I'm like, how could I even have a good time finishing my vacation? But it was just like, I don't want my death to be a bother, just finish it, come back whenever. I'll still be dead. And I'm okay, whatever, Mom. But far from the reality.
I had a similar conversation with my sons recently because a topic had come up about passing, and I said, I'm not going to be in the shell. I don't really care. I don't, and it wasn't being dismissive or saying that someone else's choices, because I think that that's another whole, and your work as a death doula, people have certain ways they want things to happen at the end of their life. And for some people, it may be more ritual or religious connections or a certain type of burial. Or again, as with everything we're talking about, nothing is right or wrong.
That's exactly right.
So we're making light of this and saying it's not going to matter, and I won't be here. But I think that's another part of the process is, are we supporting our loved ones in our own grief? So if it's a family passing, or if it's the family cat passed, or is everyone getting time and space to grieve?
I think that's a very unique experience for everybody. It also depends on your relationship to the person. it can depend on a lot of other factors. You feel a lot of guilt. You can feel a lot of shame. You lose friends over death. I mean, and grief. And I know that one of the things that I had to personally go through was just, it was almost like a blame game. Because me and my son, we had a very difficult time with my mother's death. And I think it just all stemmed from having just gone through a COVID pandemic and trying to save all these people that had it, and then losing her to the thing that she protected herself very well.
Mm-hmm.
And just losing her despite all the precautions that she had taken, and someone that was in very good health, still working full time, it was just hard to wrap your head around. And then with all the other things of not being able to have a funeral, not being, so there was just like a lot of things that happened. And now it is more normal. But while I'm talking about a funeral, Denise, did you know that the funeral homes have only been around like in the last 100 years or so?
Yeah.
Is that not crazy? Because
Yeah.
you would think at this day and time that they had been around forever, but I honestly didn't realize until recently that people, I mean, I do know that they had to the funerals at their homes, but I didn't realize that funeral homes weren't a thing back then as well.
Um, the state that I live in is one of the few states that still allows burials without the big encasement that the coffin is supposed to go in. And I know that there's a lot of push here in the States, but also globally, for green funerals where there is a natural process of going back to the earth, or people may choose cremation, or they may choose something else. But you're right, it's become an industry. And I knew someone that worked in a funeral home years ago. She said there's a checklist, and it's very much, and no disrespect to anyone who is in this industry, but there's a checklist of cost. So, put on makeup, and there's a cost associated, and all the different things. But equally, there is I'm thinking two things at the same time: that aspect of the financial, but also there was a woman who I knew, who she and her husband ran a small town funeral home. And she said, I was always so meticulous to make sure that their hair and their makeup, and that when their family saw them, they would see their loved one and have some peace. So I think that there's a duality with the industry. As I shared on the recent episode that I did with Samantha about grief, the conversation show that we did, we've gone in a relatively short period of time from having a person in the front room where people came by the home to visit, to having it become a very sterilized environment.
And not only that, if I remember correct, I mean, even as 30 years ago, there was still feeling a lot more feeling of community. Mm-hmm. Even like 30 years ago, when I remember my grandmother dying, and the church was full of people. There were people bringing by food. I mean, and it really did feel like you were supported. And now it's just like, let's hurry up, get them buried. Like it's so fast that everything has to happen. I don't know how anybody has time to process anything or make decisions unless they've already been pre-planned, and which we could do a whole nother show about doing plans for your funeral and what all that stuff entails, because that's a whole nother beast. And the aftercare.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think that what I really respect greatly is, and this is on your website, is that you see all of the work that you do as a partnership of hope. That life is hard, loss is difficult, it's painful, but you're giving people the skills and the techniques to release negativity, to work through some loss, and to find that how they can best process what they're going through. So would you like to talk about what you offer on your site and where you see your practice going?
So right now I do offer transitional life coaching. And that is, if you're in any kind of situation where you just feel like you're stuck and you need a way through, that's a great way. Now, I do want to add, I don't provide mental health. If you book a call with me or book a session with me and I see that it looks like that I couldn't help you, that you're outside of my scope of practice, I can refer you to someone, because I am not a mental health clinician, and I want to make that clear. But what I can do is, if you are willing to hold yourself accountable and meet goals that you make for yourself, we can work together to get you through to where you want to be.
Your focus is on presence and future and releasing what's been holding people back, whether that's in their everyday life, any kind of loss. And I think that gift of clarity, that sometimes we need someone to hold up the mirror for us or shine a light on those things that we're having a difficult time processing on our own. Anyone who's interested in the array of services that you offer, yes, you do the one-on-one coaching. You have an incredibly strong base of knowledge and experience on a personal and professional level with grief and loss. But there are also, you have a really innate ability as an intuitive to work through spiritual coaching as well. So if someone is a sensitive and an empath, you can blend that in seamlessly with your other work or as an individual offering.
Correct.
So where can people find you?
You can find me at inappropriategriefcoach.com. And yes, I know it's a little bit long, and there is a little bit of a story behind that.
Well, what is the story? I'd love to hear that.
Well, I wrote a little blog about it, and at first I thought, I wanted to be the inappropriate grief coach just because of my inappropriate sense of humor. Because if you know me personally, I am the jokester. I'm the one that will wait an entire year to pull a practical April Fool's joke on you and have it ready to the T. So that's where I first thought about it, is like my inappropriate humor. And then I said, wait a minute, no. Inappropriate. Who wants grief in their life? Grief is always inappropriate. So that's where the inappropriate grief coach come from. Because if somebody wants grief, please email me and say, I am the first in line for grief. I will give it to you in the form of a roast. There you go. I'm kidding, but yeah, that's where you can find me, inappropriategriefcoach.com, and I'm also on Instagram at Inappropriate Grief Coach and Facebook as well.
Thank you.
Those are some places you can find me. I also wanted to add one thing. You were talking about the stages earlier, and everybody should know what the stages are by now. But one thing I don't know, people look at that as a model for grief. It actually wasn't designed to be a model for grief at all. It was designed to be a model for people that were facing a diagnosis. And it just kind of adapted into like the grief model. So it's kind of widely been misinterpreted, but it is still in that model of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross never intended on it to be grief. She intended on it to be like for a diagnosis, facing death.
Really important part to add, because unexpected diagnosis or prolonged illness, or that is a different level of grief, because you're in it for a long time. From people in my life who are facing these challenges right now, people very near and dear to my heart, it is a very cyclical pattern of okay, and then you can almost watch the cycle happen. But that's interesting to me. I didn't realize that that's where that originally started. That was the beginning stages of it.
I had no idea either. And then as I started learning, I said, that actually makes sense, because after the death, how can you bargain after somebody dies? Death is final. You can't bring them back. Mm-hmm. And so I was glad that I learned that, but it's still misinterpreted to this day as far as the 5 stages.
Right. How would you differentiate if someone needs mental health support versus the supports that you're able to provide as a grief coach and trauma specialist?
I would have to have an initial session with them and kind of see where they're at on their grief journey. If they are not ready to be held accountable for their action or their inaction, if they are still experiencing like tremendous bouts of sadness to where they're not functional, that's where I could not help them. But I would do the initial call with them just to kind of see where they're at. I can make the referral to mental health if I felt like they needed it, or just recommend it to them, because I definitely don't want to try to help someone or try to work with them through their grief if they're not in a place where they are actually ready to work with it.
Again, so vitally important, because the only thing I can compare it to is, as a medium, if someone comes to me and they've recently lost someone and they're so raw, they don't know where to go, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to function through it. If they wait a few months or have some time to acclimate, it allows what I can bring through to have more meaning and bring more solace, because they're more open to it. Whereas it's a time factor sometimes for people.
Absolutely. And I think people think that the first year is probably the hardest in grief because you're really getting acclimated to everything. Me personally, I don't remember a lot about the first year that after I lost my mom. I know I made a lot of dumb decisions and I made a lot of good decisions, but I don't remember a lot. It wasn't until that second year where the fog kind of started lifting and I was able to kind of feel maybe not more like my normal self, but feel like how I was going to navigate my life without her in it, because it is a new normal.
Where I'm coming up on the anniversary of my mother's passing, and it's been quite a while, but I would be a liar to say it didn't change me forever, and that it still comes back in waves. And I'm a medium, and I know she's let me know she's okay and all that stuff. But as someone who's still here, I think that's I think we need to be gentle with ourselves and not say, I should be over this by now, or why do I still cry all these years later, or why do I still feel the need to have this same conversation that I've had, for my entire life with someone who's been off the planet for a while. You have to just find the way that it works for you and find people who will support you and understand that you need some gentleness. Sometimes it goes back to what you said about we get 3 to 5 days of bereavement. There is no timeline.
No, there's no timeline. And when you say grief can come in waves, you can just be in the grocery store and walk by the apples and all of a sudden cry because, oh my God, she loved apples and these are so beautiful. I'd love to buy her one. And people are looking at you like you're a complete nutcase. And you're just crying because she loved apples. And that's okay. I mean, people need to know it's okay if you feel those moments of sadness. Are you going to feel like a nut? Probably. But you know what? Who cares? If that's what helps you get through your grief, then cry at the damn apples.
Think expressing and releasing that emotion, if you have to scream into a pillow or cry in the shower or take a walk by yourself and yell at the night sky, you have to release that emotion.
And even if you're mad at the person that died, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is okay. I think it's part of it. It's part of the process.
It's definitely part of the process. And Denise, I know you've lost both your mother and father. I've lost both my mother and father. And does it ever get easier being an orphan?
Someone had told me that years ago, that when you lose both your parents, you'll have that stage of feeling like you're an orphan because you're the next generation up. There's no one above you now. What's really, really cool is that with what's happening now for many of us, we're able to integrate that ancestral lineage and do the healing work that they may not have been able to address when they were here. So that's another whole aspect of this grief work that we're talking about, is you may be able to process through your own grief something someone that you lost wasn't able to express in their lifetime. And maybe as a sensitive, that's one of the reasons you feel it was such an intensity, is that you're not only processing what you're going through, but what your loved one or your pet or your friend or whoever wasn't able to work through while they were here.
Absolutely. And you're right. It is such a big part of the work, is the generational trauma. That is a big part of work too. Because I have done my own work, and it's hard. It's hard doing your own work, let alone helping people.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. You're really, your kindness, your compassion just emulates through everything that you're saying, but you're also, you are very humble in not sharing your level of experience and expertise in this field. And I think that that's really important for anyone who may reach out to you, that you've done a lot of training, you've had your own personal challenges, you've overcome grief in many, many aspects of your own life. So you have a compassion and understanding of where people really are on their journey. And your goal to help people find heart again, find hope, find joy is a beautiful, beautiful gift. So thank you.
You are very welcome, and I appreciate you having me on as well.
Well, again, it's Jennifer at inappropriategriefcoach.com. Please check her out in her amazing services. If you need some somewhat dark, somewhat funny humor, check out her Instagram, Inappropriate Grief Coach. And thank you all for listening. And remember that it doesn't matter what you came here to do, it's going to help someone. Find what lights up your heart and start walking in that direction. Take care.